You know, I hate to think that some members of this body want to actively make it harder for Iowans who are simply trying to live their lives, to work to get ahead and secure a strong financial future. As lawmakers, we should be committed to enabling greater participation in the economy for transgender Iowans just as much as every other Iowan. That is how we foster social and economic progress, as well as more inclusive and equitable society. These are my opening comments.
Is there discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is interesting in the context of this conversation that Representative Madsen is speaking about women's struggle for rights. Under federal law, particularly the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, discrimination based on sex, including gender identity, is prohibited in credit transactions. Additionally, in most cases, credit underwriters never even know that an applicant identifies as transgender. And under the provisions of this legislation, were it to pass, transgender individuals will have the same rights as everyone else in this room, including white guys who some folks in this room would say have a lot of white privilege. So, Mr. Speaker, I would urge the body to resist this amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Madsen for closing remarks, Amendment H1028.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would simply say I would simply say that that just isn't true. Once again, as lawmakers, we should be committed to enabling greater participation in the economy for transgender Iowans just as much as every other Iowan. That is how we foster social and economic progress, as well as a more inclusive and equitable society. That is what we are called upon to do as representatives for the people we serve. And yes, we also serve our transgender brothers and sisters. I ask for your support of this amendment. I move the amendment, and I ask for a division in a record. Second.
Representative Madsen moves Amendment H1028, requests a division in record, second by Representative Confers of Polk. That's now record. Roll call vote. Will the clerk open the machine? Receive your vote. Representative Johnson of Polk votes aye. Have you all now voted? The clerk closes the machine. The House pay attention to the results of the vote. Those voting aye, 31. Those voting no, 63. Absent or not voting, 6. The amendment has failed. Will the clerk call up the next amendment?
H1030 by Wilburn of Story.
Chair recognizes Representative Wilburn for opening remarks on Amendment H1030.
Good afternoon. I forgot where we're at here. Good afternoon, colleagues in the House. This amendment removes the striking of gender identity from sections involving discrimination in housing. So it puts it back in. That is a protected class. Now, the preamble to the United States Constitution starts, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice," and on and on. Now, how do we ensure that? How do we know that someone's not been given that right, that their domestic tranquility, that they've got justice and freedom from being discriminated? We have indicators. There are signs. Those signs in U.S. law and Iowa law are called protected classes. Age, race, disability, gender identity. If those aren't present, then it's harder to determine. How do we know? We can't get into someone's mind necessarily that they are discriminated based on any of those. And so in housing, if I owned, multiple properties and was renting any of them out, if I used to rent to you based on your race, whether you're white or Latino or of Asian descent, then yes, I would have discriminated on you based on race. There's no such thing as reverse discrimination. I would have discriminated on you based on race. So how does it work in housing? You cannot refuse to sell, rent, lease, sublease, refuse to negotiate, or to otherwise make unavailable, deny real property housing accommodation or interest to a person because of the protected categories. And so by putting gender identity back in there, we are assuring that someone has a home, that they have a place to live, that they are not houseless, not homeless. We have a crisis situation in terms of housing, both affordability, availability, and accessibility, the various reasons that become homeless, houseless. Right here in our capital city, back in my county of Story, in Ames, city councils are putting ordinances, it's called ordinance at the local level, that are making it harder for people who might be homeless to live. And when you are in a homeless situation, if you can't find a place to rent, and now cities are making it difficult for where you might go, not only are you homeless, houseless, it affects your physical health. It affects negatively your physical health, your mental health. Now, how does it show up? You know, I'm not going to rent to you because you're transgender. We heard in the public hearing today people talking about the way people dress. Maybe it's a man wearing makeup. I've worn makeup. Did it on Iowa Press a couple weeks ago. Maybe their voice sounds too soft. They don't sound like a man. Maybe they're too tall. And those are the things that help provide indicators that someone, among the things, that they have discriminated, refused to rent, refused to provide those housing accommodations based on gender identity. I will stop there. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Is there a discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Wilburn, for your comments. In response to the argument that transgender individuals would lose housing under this legislation, it's important to clarify that this bill does not directly impact housing rights. Existing federal protections under the Fair Housing Act prohibit discrimination based on sex, and also local jurisdictions have their own laws that provide further protections. The reality is that were this legislation passed, every single Iowan would have the same protections. I would urge the body to resist this amendment. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, chair recognizes Representative Wilburn for closing remarks, Amendment H1030.
Any potential federal housing protection would be through some case law. It might be through administrative rule, administrative code. And we are at risk for those protections being taken out given the Trump administration's efforts to get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And yes, our subdivisions, county, city, school boards, although they're not dealing with housing, this will supersede that. There's many cases where we are taking those rights away from them. They need to have those protections at the local level. I'm hoping that there's bipartisan support to ensure people have a place to live without fear and actual discrimination of being denied housing. I'm hopeful that what a former mayor of Baton Rouge, Louisiana said at the NAACP banquet last week, I think it was last week, in talking about the purpose of the NAACP and its origins, that it took a broad array of people with different values, different beliefs to have courageous collaboration. If you have any concern, and I know you do, because several of you are giving to our faith communities, there are many here, and I want to acknowledge my church, the Episcopal Church, and thank our bishop for being here today. I know you have compassion. I'm asking you to have some courageous collaboration to ensure that regardless of your gender identity, that you can find a place to live in Iowa without discrimination. Mr. Speaker, I move adoption of this amendment and ask for a division and record roll call.
Representative Wilburn moves Amendment H1030, requests a division of record, second by Representative Converse. This is now a record roll call vote. Clerk, open the machine and receive your vote. Have you all now voted? Clerk, close the machine. The House may attend to results of the vote. Those voting aye, 31. Those voting no, 62. Absent or not voting, 7. The amendment fails. Clerk, call up the next amendment.
H1031 by Losia Polk.
Chair recognizes Representative Lundgren for opening remarks. Amendment H1031.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do ask for an unanimous consent to withdraw this amendment.
Are there objections? Hearing none, so ordered. The House will stand at ease. The House will be in order. We have now disposed of all amendments. Is there discussion on the bill? Chair recognizes Representative Kahn first.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain now has an asterisk, unless you don't comport to our thoughts and our beliefs. We are removing people's rights today. This legislature, the majority party, is removing the rights of fellow Iowans to housing, credit, and jobs. Do not tell me the federal government will save us, because they're already attacking the communities we're attacking today as well. And if the federal government does all of this already, then why do we need to do it? What's the point? Whose rights will be taken away next? Once you open this door, it's wide open, friends. A couple years ago, there was a bill here to ban gay marriage introduced in the House. And it was not brought to subcommittee or the floor, but we alerted folks about it. We heard from about 70,000 Iowans who opposed this. Those 70,000 Iowans were not all members of the LGBTQ community. They were fellow Iowans who believe in the rights of their fellow Iowans. Similarly, the feedback we've gotten on this bill has been overwhelmingly opposed to taking away fellow Iowans' rights. I am angry, and I tell my caucus not to speak on the floor when you're angry. Sorry. I don't want to hear about freedom ever again. We are taking away the freedom of our fellow Iowans to live the lives they want to live. I don't want to hear about freedom. Don't tell us we're overreacting and everything will be fine, because again, if everything's fine, what are we doing here? And if we've never done it before. No one in the country has ever done this before. We would be the first state in the country to take away rights from a protected class. So we don't know what the impact will be. So don't tell us we're overreacting. I've heard a lot about how this bill will protect women. With all due respect, as someone who has fought for women's rights my entire life, I don't need your protection. I don't need you to protect me. I need you to protect all Iowans, because that is what we are here to do, to look out for our fellow Iowans. My mom has a sticker at home that says, "Equal rights for me does not mean less rights for you." Rights aren't pie. There are plenty of rights to go around. And I feel that we've put up a false narrative here. I'm too angry to talk much more. I've watched it happen in this room. I've seen this for a few years now. I've watched the arm twisting. I've watched the bold declarations that will be no longer. I've watched you fight and cower. You know this is wrong. You know it's wrong to take away rights. And I want to congratulate you on your legacy of being the first ever to vote to take away rights from our fellow constituents. For Cassie, for Lily, for Timber, for Sandra, for Cody, and for Amy, vote no.
Chair recognizes the House will be in order. Chair recognizes Representative Wilburn.
Members of the House and the public who are here today, folks who are listening in, not just in Iowa, I know they're listening across the country. I know my family in Illinois, Michigan, Texas, Massachusetts are listening in. Shout out to my son James, a member of the transgender community. I've shared the story of my son and his journey. I'll just ask you to think about that. Keep him, others you may have seen, I mean, these are our friends, our families, our neighbors. I don't really have any written comments for this, so I'm not attempting to stall Mr. Speaker. Just when you say that my time's up, I will stop. But look, these are our friends, our neighbors, our family members. I've heard a lot of comments about people's fears. They're genuine. I acknowledge folks who were in support of this bill. I acknowledge the fears that you have. Those are real. But discrimination is more than just fear and feelings, right? That's why we have the protected code classifications. I walked you through those. Our Constitution, our founding documents are not perfect. The other part of the Constitution says, in order to form a more perfect union. It was not perfect. There was negotiation. There was courageous collaboration at the time of the founding of our country and the Constitution. There was courageous collaboration. There was anger, fear, frustration. The country almost didn't come together. In fact, it ripped apart around the issue of slavery during the United States Civil War. The founders of this country recognized the document they put together wasn't perfect, because that's why we have the rights, the Bill of Codes, the Bill of Rights that were added. We have the Bill of Rights because it was not a perfect document. They recognized that they weren't perfect, that human beings aren't perfect. We're nowhere near the eyes, the spirit of our Creator, whatever you view as our Creator. And so therefore, they said we have to create the possibility for amendments. Iowa Constitution can be amended to move us towards a more perfect union, recognize that we are not perfect beings. In the original Constitution, women did not have rights. They were not property owners. In the original Constitution, I, as a black man, would have been counted for the purpose of the census 3/5 of a person, not because I had rights, but for the property owners to be able to use that for tax and wealth purposes. The values change over time. That's why women were given rights through amendment. That's why slavery was abolished through the 13th and 15th Amendment. That's why we had the Civil Rights Act of 1964. People recognized that people are not perfect, and they will deny people their rights, the pursuit of happiness, based on a variety of things. It cannot be based on what we look like. It cannot be based upon the protected classes that we have. We all have them. We all have a gender identity. We all have gender. We all have age. They change over time. It's not just the ones that don't change. I hope to get older. I shared 10 years ago I didn't have arthritis. I have arthritis now. My abilities may fade as time approaches. Why not take the approach of uplifting, including our fellow Iowans? Talk about other states, not having this provisions in their not having gender identity in their constitutions, in their civil rights codes. There was a time when Iowa came before the rest of the nation in terms of making sure that blacks could have an education. Any version of separate but equal, or not nearly equal, or whatever it says in the bill, is a tilt towards division and separation. I just ask you to think about our place in history, the conversations that may have occurred in these halls, and arguments that came up during the public hearing about people that might be different than you, that might sound, look different. I'm still hoping there's bipartisan support to defeat this. Please reach down for that courageous collaboration to defeat this. Let's make sure that Iowa is a place, and we once again can stay leading the nation, move closer to that perfect union. join me in voting no. No to potential discrimination on gender identity, and affirming that our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain.
Chair recognizes Representative Wessel-Kroschel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues of the House. Our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. I hope we hear that a lot today because it should mean something to all of us. Discrimination in any form is unacceptable. Today, we're looking to take away rights from our friends, family, neighbors, and colleagues who are LGBTQ+. You have a right to your personal beliefs, but the government has a responsibility to take action when people are being treated unfairly simply because of their sexuality. This is, for me, the Accept Bill. Everyone in Iowa has a right to a home except for trans Iowans. Everyone has a right to a job except for trans Iowans. Everyone has a right to an education except for trans Iowans. Everyone has a right to sit at the lunch counter except for trans Iowans. There are so many reasons to vote against this bill, but let's focus on a few. First, we have a workforce shortage in this state, including but not limited to physicians, nurses, lawyers, software engineers, and skilled labor. Our LGBTQ+ friends are represented in these fields, and we need them. Over 3/4 of Fortune 500 companies prohibit discrimination based on gender identity. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, and it's good for business. It's good for Iowa, too. Trans Iowans are humans just like us, and that often gets lost in the vitriol. It's important to know who you are taking away rights from today. I'm honored that my friends and my constituents are willing to share their stories with me, as emotional as they may be. But it's my responsibility as a legislator to listen to my constituents. Their stories are important. Pastor Sonia from Ames has a trans daughter who is a 17-year-old high school student. Nikki plays the flute in both the school band and at church. She takes every AP course available, seeking to get the best grades. She has fierce and amazing friends who have been with her since she was 3 years old and sitting through children's sermons. Pastor Sonia shared Nikki's story. Nikki was in conflict with who she was from a very young age. She would scream, throw her body against walls, and spent 2 days in the hospital for suicide ideation before she was in 4th grade. Before she was in 4th grade. She was young and she didn't have words for how she felt. Pastor Sonia and her husband struggled with how to help Nikki. Nikki gave her mom a few hints, such as asking, "Do all boys have to grow facial hair?" When she was in 4th grade, her mom gave her the book, I Am Jazz. After reading the book, she exclaimed with joy, "There is a name for me." Once she made the discovery, Nikki stepped into herself. She had the assistance of professionals and medications. Nikki wants to study astrophysics at Iowa State University. I might add that's a great choice. Iowa would be lucky to have her. However, if this bill passes, she will be going to the University of Minnesota. In Pastor Sonia's words, Iowa should benefit from the gift that Nikki is. In my words, we can't afford to lose Nikki or her family. Pastor Sonia shared the following Bible verse which speaks to her regarding God's love for her daughter. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Another mom of a trans adult child offers some good insight. She says, no one becomes trans because it is a fad or it is fun. There have been trans people on this planet for thousands of years. Embrace them. It has been an honor that my friends and constituents are willing to share their personal and difficult stories. It is enriching to listen with an open mind to someone who has experienced something different than me. Understanding the unique challenges of my constituents is a critical part of my job. I've had the opportunity to meet, engage, and learn the humanness of those Iowans whose rights are challenged today. I hope each and every one of you has had that opportunity. Guaranteeing civil rights to trans Iowans does not take away from anyone else's rights. Rights are not a pie. It doesn't mean fewer rights for women or anyone else. It means that trans Iowans will have a right to a home, an education, a job, and a seat at the diner. These are basic needs, and no one should be denied them. This bill sends a destructive message to Iowa's young people. Iowans need to know that they are all persons with innate worth and not second-class citizens. This bill creates a caste system where one group of people, Iowa trans citizens, do not have the same set of rights that we have. Again, rights are not a pie. In 2007, I was the floor manager of the bill to add sexual orientation and gender identity to Iowa's Civil Rights Code. When people ask me what my proudest moment is, as a state representative, my answer is always passing that bill. It was passed with support from both parties. It would not have won without both parties. The LGBTQ plus community stuck together and wanted to make sure that Iowa did it right the first time by including gender identity the first time. Iowa is a better place for all because we did that. I received many letters back then from Iowans who left but wanted to come back, or who wanted to leave, and those who wanted their family members to feel safe in Iowa. I saved those letters. One of those young Iowans returned because the bill passed. He had offers in several other places, but he is an Iowan at heart, and we passed a law to protect his rights, so he returned. I won't divulge his name, but I will say he plays a prominent role in Iowa today, and many of us here in this chamber know him. We should be welcoming and protecting all Iowans. This bill is a disgrace to our heritage of recognizing the value of all people, often before the rest of the country does. We will be the first state to go backwards. Backwards, that's the only word you can use for it. I will stay on the right side of history. Think long and hard about how you want to be remembered. My proudest moment was adding sexual orientation and gender identity to the Iowa Civil Rights Code. Is today your proudest moment? If it is taking away civil rights from a protected class, I am so very sorry. Discrimination in any form is unacceptable. Our liberties we prize, our rights we will maintain. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Judge.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the Iowa House. For those that may know me, I want to tell you a little bit about my family that don't know me. I have a rich heritage in this state of the Judge family. See, we came here in 1855 to the United States. through New York, like many do, and worked our way out here, down the Ohio River to St. Louis, up to Missouri, and got off in Bedford, Taylor County. Started farming there. They were farmers. See, they were Irish Catholic. The year is 1865. And if you know history in that part of the country, the furthest part of southwest Iowa, and especially on the western border of Missouri, is very tumultuous times. And in the Civil War, there was a lot of animosity. And they were bringing a priest in, my great-great-grandfather's brother, Michael Judge, from Georgetown. He's bringing a priest in to say Mass on Sundays. And the whole community started getting upset with these Irish Catholics that talked differently, that acted differently, that worshiped differently. And there was rumors. They didn't want them there. They were not welcome. And they started talking about moving. They were afraid. So they decided to move. And in 1865, they had a farm sale. And during that farm sale, my cousin was shot and killed because of his faith. So I'm telling you about my rich heritage. My parents, my grandparents told me this story when I was a little kid, under 10, quite frankly, and I didn't really know what to think of it then. But my grandpa said, step up when it's your turn. And I didn't know what he meant. A lot of things he said, I didn't know what he meant. The family moved in the middle of the night. They picked up their belongings and moved to a little part of the state called Georgetown, Iowa. Many of you know where it's at. Drive by it. It's a sandstone Catholic church that my family helped build. And it stands today. Their names are on the windows, and they're buried across the street. You may want to know why I bring this up. Because I had constituents this week, multiple emails from constituents in my district that asked me to vote no on this bill. They were heartfelt emails. They weren't the form ones that you get over and over and over again. These were heartfelt emails that I read and responded to. They used the words afraid. They used the words not welcome. And they also used the words I consider moving. So what you're doing is not right. This bill takes gender identity out of the Civil Rights Code. And it takes away housing rights. You just have to read it. Employment rights and credit rights, civil rights of these folks. See, I don't claim to be an attorney. I don't act like one. And I don't need one to tell me what's right and wrong. I know it in my gut. I know this is wrong. We're talking about fellow Iowans here. We get so caught up in the minutia and talk about this lawsuit or that lawsuit and who's going to do this and who's going to do that. We're talking about Iowans. See, I was raised to look for the good in people. You know, if you look for the good in people, I don't judge them versus R versus D. Many of you know me, and I'm good friends with a lot of people in here. I don't look at you like that. I don't look if you're gay or straight. I don't think about any of that stuff. I just look at you as a person. See, if you look for good, you'll find it. And if you look for hate, it'll live in your heart. So I'm proud to stand up here against this bill. And I'm proud of my grandpa said, step up when it's your turn. I know he meant.
Chair recognizes Representative James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Neighbors and friends in the House, thank you for giving me a few moments to unpack my thoughts on this particularly cruel and hateful bill. There is a data point from the Chamber of Commerce that they often talk about. We're the only state in the country that hasn't doubled its population in the last 100 years. We know recently from the Atlas Migration Project that we're in the top 10 states in the country for population drain. We also know that we're number 7 when it comes to young people leaving our state. This bill is cruel, this bill is hateful, this bill is unwelcoming. Many of you know my story in this chamber, but for those of you who are here in the public, thank you for being here. I'm an ordained Presbyterian pastor, and I have spent the bulk of my career outside of politics working as a chaplain in higher education, coming across so many amazing young people in my life. And I want to go back to talk about young people here in a minute, because this is, I think, the most important part of this conversation. In my seminary training, I took 3 years of classes to get a master's degree. I had to learn Greek and Hebrew, and then I had to take a whole battery of examinations around the Bible content, theology, different religions. I had to pack a lot in a 3 years master degree program. But there was one moment in that master's degree program that was really moving and profound for me. It was when we had a guest theologian in our class, and he held up a Bible, a really large Christian Bible, right? It was big and it was thick. And then he said to us that when he was in seminary, he actually engaged in a practice where he removed pieces of scripture out of this huge Bible that had anything to do with Jesus welcoming the children, the least, the lost, the lonely, the poor, the pushed aside, those who are on the margins of society, the widow, the orphan, the foreigner, the stranger. He removed every single piece of scripture that had reference to that, and then he held up that Bible, and it was very, very thin in comparison to the Bible he held up. His point being that the heart of Christian scriptures is about welcome. It's about loving your neighbor. And it's about God's heart in particular for the poor, the pushed aside, and those who are on the margins of society. There are parables, there are commandments, there are teachings that Jesus used to flip societal norms and expectations. And he used these to show God's heart for those who were overlooked or despised by society. Today, we heard from many young people in a public hearing who cried out to us, asking them to protect their rights, to live by the motto of this state: our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain, not just for them, but for all of us. And they asked us to include them in our motto. I am shocked, I am horrified, I am deeply distressed by the fact that this is even a conversation that our body is having today. This bill legalizes discrimination, and it will open the door for continued stigma of a vulnerable population, and even potential for further violence against our neighbors. To the young people who had the courage to speak up today at the public hearing, to Skylar, to Cade, to Gemma, to Izzy, to all of their allies who came and spoke up today, I want you to know that courage is contagious. And your courage is inspiring not just me, but will continue to inspire generations to come. To the LGBTQ community, we see you, we hear you, we love you. Today, I will stay on the right side of history. I hope you will too. Vote no on this hateful bill.
Chair recognizes Representative Crokin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to congratulate my colleagues on their eloquence in earlier comments. But as a member of the Judiciary Committee, I also want to rise and comment on this action. First, I'd like to share with you a letter. I suspect many of you got a copy of it, or I know you've gotten dozens and dozens of similar letters. This one is written by a young man whose name I will not reveal on the floor. I am a college student at the University of Kansas. Why would I be contacting you? I am writing because of my disapproval of HSB 242. I understand the Judiciary Committee is meeting today to discuss if this bill should move to the floor. I believe this bill poses a lot of harmful rhetoric and can be extremely impactful toward all Iowans. The bill aims to remove gender identity as a protected class in the state of Iowa. If this bill becomes law, every Iowan could be affected. I love Iowa, and I would love to return, but I cannot continue to live in a state that wants to divide its citizens. By letting this bill become law and gender would become one definition, sex and gender would become one definition. Multiple definitions from sources such as the Yale School of Medicine, National Institute of Health, and the Merriam-Webster Dictionary show that gender is the expression of a person, while sex is the biological makeup of a person. Any Iowan should be allowed to feel safe and protected if they choose to express their gender differently than their sex. One's own gender expression cannot and will not, underlined, harm others. The current Iowa logo reads, "Freedom to flourish." If you believe this quote, if you believe in Iowa, if you believe in Iowans, you will vote against this bill. I urge you to vote against HSB 242. Ladies and gentlemen, again, you have all received dozens and dozens and dozens of such emails. If you were able to pay attention to the public hearing today, you again heard from representatives of many groups who indicated their loss of confidence in quite frankly, the dream that is Iowa. As an Iowa transplant, Iowa is aspirational to the rest of the country. You're losing that. I am rising today in opposition to what is quite possibly the worst piece of economic development legislation I've ever seen. Why we would continue to want to damage our state economy, which is already ranked in the 10 slowest growing economies in the nation, is just not clear to me. But more importantly, as men and women of faith or goodwill, you have to know this is not right. Any problem that could be fixed with a gender-neutral bathroom does not require a draconian stripping of the civil rights of an otherwise vulnerable group. I'm asking you to rise above your political affiliations and vote no against this mean-spirited and hateful act that is a disgrace to all of us as Americans. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I don't even know if I can get through this. It's a day anyway. I rise today in opposition to HF 583. I did not run for this office to take away the rights of my fellow Iowans. I ran for office to lower their costs, raise wages, and make Iowa a place where every person, no matter their identity, can thrive. And instead of going through my own personal rationale for voting against this bill, I think it's better to tell you a story from one of my constituents. This particular constituent has reached out to me every session since I've been elected about hateful legislation targeting the trans community in Iowa. It's sad that she has had to do this 3 times now, but I appreciate her sharing her story with me. And now I'll share with you her comments. My name is Maddie Block, and I'm a medical student at the University of Iowa, Carver College of Medicine, and the proud sibling of a beloved transgender individual. I'm reaching out today because I am deeply concerned about HF 583, not just for the transgender community, but for the broader implications it has on all Iowans, including cisgender women. My sibling, like so many transgender individuals, simply wants to live a life of dignity, safety, and respect. They have faced challenges that most of us will never have to endure, navigating healthcare barriers, social stigma, and the constant fear of discrimination. The protections that exist under the Iowa Civil Rights Act have been a vital safeguard against this kind of harm. Stripping these protections away sends a clear message that my sibling and people like them do not deserve the same rights as others. Beyond transgender Iowans, this bill also weakens protections for all people, including cisgender women, by legally defining sex as strictly biological and immutable at birth. This bill could have unintended consequences for intersex individuals, gender non-conforming women, and even medical protections that women rely on. Maddie continues, as a future physician, I have dedicated my career to evidence-based medicine and public health, and from a medical standpoint, this bill is both harmful and unsupported by science. Medically, sex is more complex than just male or female. Conditions like insensitivity syndrome or intersex variations challenge the idea of strict binary. Gender identity, which this bill seeks to erase from legal protections, is widely recognized in medicine and psychology as a real, significant part of human identity. Additionally, we know that from overwhelming research that policies restricting gender identity protections increases rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide among transgender individuals. The Trevor Project and American Medical Association report that when transgender youth lose legal protections, their risk of attempting suicide significantly increases. Beyond the harm to transgender people, this bill creates legal and medical confusion. Could this affect medical records and insurance coverage for conditions like PCOS, endometriosis, or hormone therapies? Could it undermine protections against sex discrimination in healthcare, making it harder for all women to access necessary medical care? Additionally, cisgender women who don't conform to traditional gender norms may find themselves wrongly questioned or denied access to spaces. Intersex individuals could face increased medical and legal challenges, and businesses, schools, and hospitals may struggle with compliance, facing lawsuits over conflicting definitions of sex and gender. She says, as a future doctor, my role is to do no harm. I urge legislators to do the same. HF 583 does real harm to transgender Iowans, to families like mine, and to the broader legal and medical landscape of our state. Transgender people deserve dignity, rights, and legal protections just like everyone else. I urge you to reject HF 583. And I want to thank Maddie for sharing this and allowing me to share her thoughts and concerns with you all. I hope this helps you understand what we're doing today and that it will cause irreparable harm and consequences and impact lives of Iowans and their families, whether they're intended or unintended. I want to end my remarks by addressing everyone watching at home, from the gallery, and for those that show up today to protest this bill. I see you. We all see you. I hear you. I value you. I'm so sorry that we have members here that have decided to focus on stripping civil rights from Iowans. I'm horrified by it. I'm sorry that instead of focusing on lowering grocery prices, affordable care, daycare for kids, that this is what we're talking about. To the trans community and allies in Iowa, I want you to know that I'm behind you. You are loved, you are valued, you are important. I know that you're not going anywhere. I see you, I love you, and I support you. Our liberties we prize, and our rights we will maintain. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Meyer of Polk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, would Representative Holt yield to some questions?
Will the representative yield?
Certainly.
You're in order.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Holt, earlier this week, in addition to what we've already covered, you stated that the language for the protected class for transgendered folks is not needed because they are protected by the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause and the Equal Protection Clause in the state constitution. Is that correct?
Representative Meyer, I'm not going to go down the hypothetical road that you're trying to go down. You feel free to make the points that you want to make. I will tell you right now that I think the only question that needs to be answered in this debate is why those opposed to this legislation are okay with a man's feelings erasing the biological reality of being a woman in the state of Iowa. Anything else you have to talk about, feel free to make your points.
Representative Holt, I'm trying to make a record here because the Supreme Court's going to look at this. They do it all the time. This is your bill. This is your opportunity to make the record. You stated earlier this week that a protected class is not needed because they are covered by the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause in the Iowa Constitution. Did you not say that?
I have answered your question, Representative Meyer.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Hold on, Representative Meyer. It's somebody. Oh, I apologize. Please refrain from engaging in debate from the gallery. Representative Meyer, I apologize. You still have time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Holt, you stated earlier what I just stated, which that this protected class language is not needed because they are protected by the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. You mentioned multiple times the Bostock decision. You also mentioned multiple times that they're protected by the Equal Protection Clauses in the Iowa Constitution. And if that is the case, and I believe it to be the case, we are down this road, and you are stripping transgender people of their protected rights, rights that they've had for 18 years, 19 years, however long Beth's been here, or Representative Wessel-Krichel's been here. But here's my point. You made those statements. I agree with you. I believe they are covered by the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. I believe they are covered by the Equal Protection Clauses in the Iowa Constitution. And if that is the case, you would then agree that they have a fundamental right to live as the rest of us do. Is that fair to say?
I've answered your question, Representative Meyer. You feel free to make the legal points you would like to make.
Is it fair to say then that this would be covered and analyzed if that is a fundamental right under strict scrutiny, and that there would have to be a compelling government interest to do what you are doing today, and that this legislation would have to be narrowly tailored to that compelling government interest? Is that fair to say?
Representative Meyer, you feel free to lawyer yourself to death and make the points you would like to make. I'm not going to engage with you on it. Lawyers love to be lawyers. You go do your lawyer thing. I have answered your question.
Okay. It's your bill. I'm asking what your intent is. I'm restating what you said earlier this week and what you loved to state earlier this week. I will say this, that even if this is analyzed and it's not considered a fundamental right, even though I believe it's a fundamental right, I think most people in this room believe it's a fundamental right to be treated the same as everybody else. And your lack of denial of that is confirmation that it is a fundamental right. But let's say hypothetically that it is not a fundamental right. What is the rational basis? The way you wrote this appears to have no rational basis behind whether or not somebody can be kicked out of their house, their rental unit, because they happen to be transgender. After you pass this bill today, that is completely a legitimate reason to kick somebody out of housing, isn't it, Representative Holt?
I do not concur with your conclusions, and I will say this to you again, Representative Meyer. Lawyer yourself to death. I am not going to engage in a gotcha conversation that you're trying to have. You make your points. You make all the points you want to make. I know you think you're the smartest lawyer in the room.
I do not.
I'm not going to engage in this conversation with you, Representative Meyer. I have answered your question.
Representative Holt, I did not point of order you on that. I do not believe that I am the smartest person in this
I have answered your question, Representative Meyer.
I'm asking questions. This is your bill.
The House will be in order. Representative Winshire will be approached well. Will both leaders approach well? Representative Meyer. Representative Meyer, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would our friends in the gallery not interrupt? Thank you. Representative Holt, since you're not answering my questions, I'll answer them for you. I do believe that this is a fundamental right. However, and that therefore they should be analyzed under strict scrutiny. And your lack of answer is by default means that you agree that this is a fundamental right. Even if you analyze it under a rational basis, and we've had this discussion here multiple times, there is no rational basis by which this bill should take away rights of the transgender community. And that this bill should take away rights on housing, wages, employment, credit. There's no rational basis for it. I ask that the body reject this, and I look forward to a legal challenge to this matter, because I think when you take away rights, and that those are fundamental rights, I think you better have a darn good reason to do it. Our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain.
Chair recognizes Representative Srinivas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will Representative Holt yield to a few questions?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
You're in order.
Thank you, Representative Holt. So, unlike many people in this room, when I'm looking at some policy, I start to think of it more from a medical standpoint, just given my everyday work as a physician. And so I just had a couple of questions when I was looking through, thinking about it and how I would treat my patients. And first question I had was in regards to page 3. On lines 4 through 6 of page 3, you give some time period, because you do understand that there are times when somebody is born that their biological sex is not immediately available. So you give a time period there of no more than 6 months. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what the language says.
Okay. Are there medical conditions where 6 months isn't sufficient?
Based upon the conversations I have with numerous individuals, I believe that 6 months was more than enough to make those determinations.
How about the mother who spoke to us today in the public hearing, the mother of Eloise, who didn't discover that she was intersex until she was 14 months, at which time they did a chromosomal test that showed that she had a Y chromosome, something they had never suspected. What do you say to Eloise's mother?
As I said before, I think there are medical tests available that would be allowed to make this determination within 6 months.
Okay, well, I'm glad you bring that up. So the only medical test that I know of that's available would be a genetic test. And we do newborn screenings right now. We don't do a genetic test during a newborn screening to determine sex chromosomes. Would you propose that we should be doing that with every newborn?
I'm not proposing anything beyond what is in this legislation, Representative Srinivas.
Well, if we want to fit within that 6-month period, I'd imagine that that would be what we would have to do. And you just suggested that there are tests. That is the only test. Just humor me. How much do you think that would cost?
I'm not going to get into hypotheticals on how much things cost, Representative Srinivas. You're a medical professional. Perhaps you'd like to tell the body what you think.
Okay, let me tell you based on my experience and based on many children like Eloise, who is not a hypothetical. The cost to add on that genetic screening would be anywhere from $30 to $150, depending on the source of the screening. In our subcommittee, in our committee hearing, you discussed how we are spending how much money in the last 10 years from the taxpayer dollars to give care to individuals that this would prevent. How much money did you say that was?
You're referring from 2015 to 2022 with taxpayers paying for these procedures for Medicaid patients and individuals in our that are incarcerated.
Oh, well, you were discussing this in public hearing. If I remember, you were saying $2 million, if I'm correct, right?
It was not. Yes, it was close to $2 million. That was up to 2022.
Okay.
We don't know since from 2022 to 2025. We don't know.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. So if we were to do this genetic testing then, and we're looking only at the same Medicaid population you're talking about, given that there are 40,000 new births in Iowa every year, and 40.8% of them are covered by Medicaid, if we added on this testing to ensure chromosomal sex at birth, or to make sure we have it within that first 6 months, we would now be looking at almost $500,000 at the very least per year, Or, if we're looking at that same time period, anywhere from $4.92 million to $24.6 million. That is a lot more than the $2 million you were concerned we're spending. Now I want to go on to another part of this bill, actually. I want to go back to page 1, section B, where the definition of exactly what a woman is and what a man is. My understanding here is that a woman is somebody who produces ova and a man is somebody who produces sperm. Is that correct?
Can I go back to the section you were just talking about on the birth?
Well, I would like to address this first.
Well, okay, but I just wonder how many percentage, and you probably know this, how many children, what's the percentage of children that we actually have to have these additional tests and don't know the sex at birth? Because it's almost nothing, isn't it?
It could actually be any child. It could be any child.
Any
Representative
child that
Holt.
we're not going to know
and
the sex of at
that is
birth?
why you would have to test every single child if you want to do this. So
That's
now can we
not
please
true.
go back?
I don't think that's true. I think
Okay, well,
that's
can
ridiculous.
okay, I'm glad that my medical degree taught me that. I would love to know
I think
what
you're
yours
twisting.
did.
I think
But
you're
can you
twisting.
please answer my question as to your definition of a woman and a man? Is it ova and sperm?
It's in the bill, Representative Srinivas. You can read. It's right here in front of you.
Okay, so what I'm reading is that a woman has to be producing ova and a man has to be producing sperm. What about a woman who's had a hysterectomy, a total hysterectomy, no longer has ovaries, no longer has ova?
That's ridiculous. The bill says The bill says, Representative Srinivas, a female means an individual who has, had, will have through the course of normal development, or would have but for developmental anomaly, etc., produces ova. So a person that has had a hysterectomy still applied to that. So your statement makes absolutely no sense. That's
Well,
like
actually,
saying
no,
a male.
I appreciate you bringing that up. The developmental anomaly, the genetic anomaly, or accident were the exceptions to has, had, or will have. So I ask you, what about somebody who's a pediatric cancer patient, a child under the age of 18 who has had to receive treatment before they ever develop that? That's not a developmental anomaly. That's not a genetic anomaly. That's not an accident. They will never and never have had produced ova or sperm.
She would have, through the normal course of development, produced ova. And so the definition still applies, Representative Srinivas.
My read of this definition is that they would have to, through normal development. Their normal development no longer allows for that. Thank you, Representative Holt. What I'm concerned about now is that we are excluding so many Iowans because this bill, even at the basis of trying to take away Iowans' freedom, was already discriminatory, but it was written so broadly that it didn't even take into account typical medical manifestations we see every single day. Manifestations that could prevent pediatric cancer patients in this state from being considered a man or a woman, and thus being protected from discrimination. We're in a state with the #1 rate of rising cancer, the only state that has a rising cancer rate. The #2 state for cancer rates, period. We have a pediatric cancer wing that was built at the University of Iowa, a giant one, because this is a massive problem here. We have a football team that is famous for their wave to those kids suffering from cancer because of the empathy they show every day. I am disappointed that we are not showing that same level of empathy here in this chamber. To all of my constituents that have reached out to me, to all of the people here, to all of the Iowans, the thousands of Iowans have emailed, DM'd, who have spoken before us, come to the public hearing, who are sitting up here today. We all see you in the Democratic Party. We all hear you. We all feel love for you. We are thankful and grateful for each and every one of you. And we are sorry that there are members in this chamber that don't feel the same way. In 1898, our federal government had the case of Plessy versus Ferguson that acknowledge that separate or equal is okay. Iowa and Iowa's elected officials more than 100 years ago proudly realized that that wasn't true, that separate but equal was discrimination. More than 100 years ago, Iowans whose shoulders we stand upon became the first state to declare that they weren't going to follow separate but equal because they knew that wasn't right. To my colleagues today, I ask you, are you going to disappoint those Iowans who stood in this chamber against discrimination by legalizing it today? Are you going to tell the thousands of Iowans who have reached out to us with their stories that you don't care about their rights? You don't care about their freedoms? That we are now going to use our vote? In what way? Are you going to disregard the rights of Iowans? Are you going to make Iowa the first state to actively take away people's rights? That's not the state I grew up in. It's not the state I want to be a part of. It's not the state I'm fighting for.
Representative Srinivas, your time has expired. Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative Turek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'd like to read a quote that many of you will be familiar with. First, they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. History doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly does rhyme. 80 years later, now here in Iowa, they have first come for disabled civil rights, with Iowa joining the 504 lawsuit, essentially trying to remove 50 years of disabled civil rights protections. Today, they come for gender identity, which would make Iowa the very first state to remove a protected class from the Civil Rights Code. Before there's no one left, I now speak up to voice my opposition. All individuals deserve to be protected from discrimination to housing.
Representative Turek, there's been a point of order. Representative Winchell, state your point. Representative Converse, Representative Winchell, approach well. Representative Winchester, your point is well taken. Representative Turek, you have 9 minutes roughly left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All individuals deserve to be protected from discrimination to housing, credit, and health care. All individuals. We were all elected to protect the citizens of Iowa, not to take rights away. We were sent here to protect the most vulnerable, not to persecute a minority group. Today we should remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King when he stated, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." Let us live up to the great state motto that our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. I urge my colleagues, all of you, let's do the right thing, the just thing. Vote no.
Chair recognizes Representative McBurney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I'll try to keep this as brief as possible, although I will say that I don't think that there should be a time limit on fighting for our civil rights. I want to read a letter from one of my constituents who unfortunately did not have the opportunity to speak during today's public hearing, and I do feel like her words are just as important as every other person's words on this floor. My name is Gwen Bertocchi. My pronouns are she, her, and I do not feel threatened by transgender women in ladies' restrooms. I'm a born and bred Iowan, and I used to be so proud of that fact. Now, frankly, I'm embarrassed to admit I'm from this once great state. But I'll tell you what I am proud of: my kid. He bravely walked away just weeks before his wedding and moved back here to Iowa to make a life for his true self as a trans person. And now the Iowa Republicans want to deny him that life. They want to take away his basic human rights to have a place to live, a car loan, an education, a job, and even health care. Defining a person based on what you can see on one piece of an intricate jigsaw puzzle is madness. You need to see the whole picture to know who someone is or isn't. There are many pieces in a biological puzzle: hormones, brain chemistry, genes, cell receptors, chromosomes. They're all part of our biology, and we can no more deny them than we can deny our fingers or our nose. Each biological piece can have a message saying it is a male or a female or non-binary. When you put them all together, you make an individual, and you cannot define that in simplistic terms. It is illogical and inhumane to put a yes or no label on that human being when you cannot see their entire self, and no law should ever try. We cannot reduce people to single pieces of an otherwise beautiful puzzle, a piece that can cost them everything that matters in a life. Just because a handful of people are uncomfortable with biological truth or follow a religion that suggests gender is binary instead of on the spectrum that many cultures and even other Christians already accept. This isn't about protecting women in sports or bathrooms. You don't need to remove civil rights to do that. Trans people make Iowa what it should be: a great state full of caring people who make a positive difference in their communities. Please, don't erase my child. Don't make it open season on my friends. Please vote against this travesty of a bill. I would like to add that my wife and I have spent the past 7+ years working to integrate immigrants into the state of Iowa. My wife is an immigrant. She came from the Philippines. The Philippines has a strong, rich culture of LGBTQ members in their community. We reach out to that community often, and we encourage them to come to the state of Iowa. We want to see the state of Iowa grow. We want to see these folks flourish in a place where they can bring their expertise and ensure that Iowa has an advantage over our neighboring states. Just recently, we helped integrate 6 new teachers into the state, a state that is bleeding teachers. We're able to do that because we can show them that we are serious about protecting their civil rights. Because they are coming from a country which has historically been known for their lack of civil rights. It's becoming much harder for us to make that sale to these folks in the Philippines when we introduce legislation like this, because it is already difficult to be an immigrant in this country. Now what we are doing is we are telling immigrants who don't conform to our definition of gender, that's our definition as a state, that you as the majority party are about to vote on, and now we want to cast away many of the same people who are going to make this state better. And I find it interesting, I have heard for the last 4 years about how the federal government is putting too much emphasis in taking away states' rights. Yet we have heard the rationale for this bill being that employment rights are protected through decisions like the Bostock decision. We've heard that credit rights are protected by the Consumer Credit Protection Act, and that there's no way for creditors to know if a person is transgender, well, except if we continue with our bill requiring gender on a driver's license or a state ID to match what it is on their birth certificate. It might be kind of obvious. I don't know many males named Megan, for instance, but I think they might be able to figure it out if they're at least somewhat intelligent. And we've also heard that the housing rights are protected by the Fair Housing Act. The common theme I am hearing is that we are depending on the federal government to protect the rights of Iowans, after hearing for the last 4 years about how the federal government was trying to do everything in their power to strip away our state's rights. In fact, there is even a member of this body who is quoted as saying, "It is past time that states exert their will against an out-of-control federal government that is well on its way to destroying our republic." So why are we depending on the federal government to protect our neighbors, our co-workers, our family members? I'm urging you to stand up for your fellow Iowans. I'm urging you to ensure that their rights we can actually maintain. Please vote no on this bill. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Magnetsky.
Mr. Speaker, fellow members of the Iowa House, and our guests today as well. First, I want to start by noting that we have partisan support for this bill, but we also have bipartisan opposition to it. And for the folks from both parties who are considering voting against this today, you are seen. Iowans are proud of you. I'm proud of you. I'm proud to be your colleague. Instead of just going into another speech from one of us legislators or lawyers, I want to elevate a story that I got from one of my constituents who you have probably seen this week. Chris Morris has been here a couple times. I think folks from both parties are friends with Chris. Chris wrote me this morning, "I write to you today not only as a friend and a constituent, but as a transgender Iowan whose rights and dignity are under direct attack by this bill. As you know, my testimony was silenced in the subcommittee hearing on Monday, but my voice and the voices of all transgender Iowans and their countless allies will not be erased. This bill remains unconstitutional, unjust, and an affront to the values of democracy, equality, and human dignity. As close as we are, I don't think I've ever shared some of my history with you. I moved to Iowa as a child in 1998 when my father got a job offer here. When he, my mother, and my siblings eventually chose to return back home to the South, I was an adult and I decided to stay in Iowa. Iowa became my home by choice. I believed in this state its values, and the economic opportunities it presented. I built my life here, and I want your colleagues to know that transgender Iowans are not political abstractions. We are their neighbors, their friends, their constituents, and in some cases, their family members. My wife and I, like many others, are now grappling with an impossible choice. Do we stay and fight for my right to exist in the state we call home? Or do we leave to protect ourselves and our children from impending discrimination? The fact that Shara and I can even have this conversation reeks of privilege, as many transgender Iowans can't even consider such options. Many of my fellow transgender and gender nonconforming students at Drake are having similar conversations with their families. Just today, a friend of mine told me she's leaving at the end of this term, regardless of the outcome of this bill. She doesn't feel safe or welcome in our state anymore, even though she has lived here her whole life. Many of my closest friends and some of the parents of my children's friends are also considering leaving the state. Studies have shown that states that pass anti-LGBTQ legislation see significant economic downturns as businesses and talent flee discrimination. This exodus should alarm any legislator who claims to care about Iowa's future. This bill, if passed, will place Iowa on the wrong side of history, as the first state to actively remove a class of people from civil rights protections. What message does that send to businesses considering investment in Iowa? What impact will this have on our ability to attract and retain talent? The long-term consequences of codified discrimination will not only harm transgender Iowans, but the economic and social fabric of all of us in this state. Please ask your colleagues who champion individual liberty, what liberty remains when the government sanctions discrimination against its own people? Ask those invoking religion to justify this bill. Where in the teachings of Jesus is there a call to cast out the marginalized rather than embrace them? Ask those who believe this is merely a political issue, how can my right to exist in public life ever be up for debate? Trans women are women. My family is real. My love is real. My gender identity and my existence are not up for debate. Please urge your colleagues, regardless of party, to reject this dangerous and unconstitutional bill. History will remember you and what you did today and your colleagues in this moment. I implore you to be on the right side of it. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Levin.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, colleagues of the House. Thank you to those who have wasted their time when they should be home with their families or at work, coming here today. And thank you to those who are not able to be here today, but who are watching from home or from work or surreptitiously on their phones while they're in line at the checkout aisle at the grocery store, because they're terrified of the result of what's happening on both sides of this building. You don't have to like what someone does or who they are to respect and value them as an Iowan and a human. And these are still Iowans that you are in office to represent and protect. Don't turn your backs on these people in your communities across this great state. I have to be honest, I heard from a lot of people on this bill, and it was not my intent to read someone else's words because I didn't think I'd be able to pick one. But this one stood out to me because of some of those last words. You don't have to like what someone does or who they are to respect and value them as an Iowan and a human. I hope that I've established in my 2.5 sessions in this body that I take this role seriously, that I did not come here to make scenes, that I did not come here to push an agenda. I read the bills, I take them seriously, I ask questions, I sit down with you, I work with you. I've developed what I think are good working relationships, consideration, respect with a great deal of my colleagues in this body, I think. When I first read through the bill before us, you might guess what line jumped off the page at me. I think Representative Srinivas probably guessed. Page 1, line 27. Separate accommodations are not inherently unequal. We've been discussing civics education a lot in this room and in this body this session. I would hope that every person in this room knows where that sentence comes from. Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court decision that prolonged racial segregation from 1986 until the unanimous Brown v. Board of Education case in 1954. An entire extra lifetime of discrimination against people on the basis of race because of the notion that accommodations can be separate but equal. Removing a protected class from the Iowa Civil Rights Code has never happened before. We've heard that already. We add protections when we see that a group has historically and in the present day faced harassment and discrimination. The only reason to remove a group from these protections is to allow that harassment and discrimination to proceed unimpeded. Housing discrimination, job discrimination, education discrimination, credit discrimination. I want Iowa to be a place where every person has a level playing field, where we stand firm against the discrimination of our neighbors and ourselves. This conversation is not about being nice. It's about taking away a level playing field. It's about removing fairness. Make no mistake, we've seen it stated clearly in the interviews given regarding this piece of legislation. The intent of this bill is to allow the government to legislate against the existence of certain Iowans without impediment. Not to improve the lives of any Iowans, not to lower costs or provide housing or child care, not to address health care costs or access, not to reduce rates of cancer. Please do not do this. Instead, let us continue to protect Iowans from losing their homes or being denied home loans or insurance. Let us continue to protect Iowans from losing their jobs. Let us continue to protect Iowans' educational opportunities. Let us continue to protect and defend happy, healthy Iowans living their lives and uplifting our communities. All Iowans deserve equal protection under the law. Our liberties we prize, and our rights we will maintain. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Johnson of Polk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues of the House, I stand before you today not just as an elected leader, but as a believer in the fundamental truth that every person, no matter their background, identity, or journey, deserves dignity, respect, and protection under the law. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells us the parable about the prodigal son. But oftentimes, we find ourselves just focused on that one son, but we forget about the older brother, the one who struggled to accept that grace was freely given. Today, too many of our trans siblings are met with rejection when they should be met with love. Too many face discrimination when they should be embraced as Iowans. The message of the prodigal son is not just about one person returning home, but it is about all of us recognizing that grace, justice, and belonging are for everyone. So I urge you, trans Iowans deserve that same right. I urge you to stand with me in opposition of this bill. So let us reject the spirit of that older brother and the prodigal son, the one who stood in judgment. And instead, my colleagues, embrace this radical love that Jesus taught himself, and that on one Friday night on a hill called Golgotha, that he died for all of us. So let us make Iowa a place where no one is cast aside, but where all are welcomed and are welcomed home. Our liberties we prize, and our rights we maintain.
Chair recognizes Representative Mattson.
Sorry, just one of those moments where I wasn't sure if it was Mattson or Madison again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon again, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, and everyone who is here with us in the building today. I'm going to use my time today to share a few personal stories because, quite frankly, the voices of our constituents are more powerful than anything I could write. I want to share something from Taylor. She wrote to all of us and spoke at the public hearing, so it might sound familiar to you. And yes, Representative Srinivas did mention her as well, but I'm going to share a little bit longer story. Taylor writes, I'm writing to ask you to protect the future of my baby daughter, Eloise. We live in Urbandale, Iowa, and I am pleading with you to consider the implications of House File 583, a bill that would remove basic protections for transgender Iowans and create complications for other Iowans who do not fall neatly into the bill's narrow definitions. Obviously, my toddler is not transgender. She does, however, have a genetic variance that would classify her as, quote, intersex, a term you may have heard but may not understand. You see, when my daughter was about 14 months old, she developed a hernia in her labia, and we discovered that she actually has testes and has 46XY chromosome. Externally, she appears completely female, but her internal sexual organs do not match. Eloise is a beautiful little human, and everyone who meets her just gushes about how perfect she is. She shows empathy for others in a way that I didn't realize was possible in a 20-month-old person. I actually have a picture of Eloise on my desk, and while I know House rules would prohibit me from holding it up for all of you to see, I would more than welcome every member of this body to just kind of swing by my desk before we take a vote so you can actually see the face of the beautiful 20-month-old girl. I hope that got your attention, just my raising my voice like that. The face of the beautiful 20-month-old girl that you are subjecting to future discrimination with this legislation. Let me get back to what Taylor said. I am terrified of what the future may hold for my daughter because of the things beyond her control, because of her genetic variants and intersex traits. I don't know what gender Eloise will identify with when she gets older. And as much as I love having a baby girl, I will cherish and love and protect my child no matter how she identifies. I fear that the world will not be so accepting and loving. HF 583 weakens protections for intersex Iowans like Eloise. It makes it so that she would be unable to change the gender marker on her birth certificate if she ends up identifying as male, despite the fact that we had no idea she had an XY chromosome when she was born. The bill sets a precedent for discrimination against anyone who doesn't fit into a gender binary. I know you are someone's child, just like Eloise is mine. Every intersex Iowan and transgender Iowan is also someone's child, someone's baby. Please don't make existing in this state any harder than it already is for people who are different from what is considered, quote unquote, normal to exist in the world. When it comes to being able to earn a living, having a place to live, or being served by a business or government office, no human should be discriminated against. Please vote against HF 583. I also received an email from a constituent that the supporters of this bill might find surprising. He writes, I'm writing about House File 583 to end transgender civil rights protection. I am conservative and a longtime Republican. I do not support people changing their gender identity, but I recognize that some people have already done this and that others will probably do this in the future. I also think everyone deserves to be treated kindly. Therefore, I do not support this bill. I hope you will vote no when it comes to the House floor. Let's treat people kindly. And on the other end of the spectrum, here is a note from a student constituent. I am a sophomore at Ankeny High School, and I just want to thank you. Having you on our side is amazing, and I'm so thankful. I just want to say thank you for advocating for queer and trans rights. It can be a struggle for some people with bullying and harassment, so helping with any bit can be of help for students and adults alike in schools. And finally, I want to talk with you about my friend Jackson. Jackson knew he was a boy since he was a child, even though he was born into a girl's body. As a young adult, he was able to start the process of transitioning and aligning with his actual gender identity. When I asked him to tell me more about the long process, the first reaction was to say, let me tell you, there are so many steps that no one would fake it. He told me about the physical process, working with doctors and therapists, watching slideshows with all the information so he could be sure. He had to get letters from doctors for every step of the process, not just physically, but also legally, changing his name, updating his birth certificate, his social security information, his driver's license. To be sure, all of this was expensive. Jackson said it was worth it, and he is fortunate to have been able to do so. But not everyone can. Most of all, Jackson is worried that the steps he has taken to be the person he is will be undone against his will. He is worried about the repercussions of this bill, which will put so many people in danger of suicide. He thinks of those who may stop transitioning or will repress their feelings just for self-preservation. He is grateful to be who he was meant to be, but he is scared for so many others, and to be candid, I am too. The last thing he mentioned in our conversation was to ask, why are they doing this to us? We just want to live our lives. I have a great job, my mental health is improved, and I'm married. I will add, his wife is also fantastic, by the way. Everything we are supposed to do. We just want to live the American dream. It has been said that nothing good happens in this building after midnight. The same is true of bills that are crammed through in a week. I've heard an argument made over the last few days that Democrats are just speaking from emotion. I'm sure that it looks like that right now. I won't deny that I am crying. But given that, I will still disagree. We are speaking of facts. We are speaking of the real life experiences of our constituents. We are telling you what this bill will do. And in my opinion, you simply refuse to hear it. But I can't pretend there is no emotion here. We are talking about people's lives. We are talking about how you are taking away the rights of Iowans to simply live their lives, to not be discriminated against, and to achieve the American dream. You know this is wrong. Deep down, you know this is wrong. Colleagues, if you are still on the fence, I beg you to join our opposition. It's not too late. I'm sorry that, in my opinion, some of you are making a decision to care more about politics than your transgender neighbors. I'm sorry that you have decided to make Iowa the first state to take away civil rights from a protected class. Thank you to everyone who has spoken up for civil rights. Thank you to those of you who have come to the Capitol to put real faces and real names to those who are targeted by this shameful and cruel legislation. I see you, I love you.
You are Iowans too. Our liberties we prize, and our rights we will maintain.
Chair recognizes Representative Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, the Civil Rights Act existed as it does now because of the moral leadership and vision of countless people, our elders, our ancestors, who fought and advocated to make real the beloved community that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. imagined for our country. The Civil Rights Act speaks to a shared commitment in our state that all people deserve to be protected by the law, that each of us deserves to live and work and participate in life as equals. To remove gender identity protection, which has been the law since 2007, is an unprecedented attack on fellow citizens. Remember, the earth is the Lord's and the world and everything in it, the world and all who live here. An attack on the very idea that all people are welcome in Iowa. It targets trans people for discrimination in employment, education, housing, public accommodations. It weakens protections for all Iowans who do not adhere to the strictest designation of gender. We also know that it's also dangerous, a precedent we should not set. To remove these protections from trans people is also to remove them from others. It is wrong to discriminate against people based on their gender identity, just as wrong as to discriminate against Black people, people of color, women, gays, the abundance of people that live and work with us every day, who worship with us every day. Again, those living with disabilities, veterans, the elderly, against people who are different, people who worship differently, people who don't worship at all. All these protections would be weakened should our legislature succeed in this unprecedented step of erasing gender identity from the Civil Rights Act. It was wrong to discriminate against people based on gender identity in the years before 2007. It was wrong to discriminate against Black people in housing, working, just every essence of life. And here we are again in the same place, choosing another group. We will not stop singing that all people are children of God. I will not stop doing what we can to make the world one in which all people can flourish, living lives of joy, dignity, and belonging. We will not stop teaching that the good news of God is for all people and all creation. We will not stop proclaiming that God loves all people. Now is the time for our words and action to be strong and true and faithful to the call of Jesus Christ. I would encourage all of our communities to extend a radical hospitality to all people, to all God's people. Let's see through the fear-mongering and rhetoric from those in positions of power that may seek to pit neighbors against neighbors. We stand in agreement with the bold courage of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Our neighbors, all our neighbors, will not be silent. Our hope is that your love for all people would be the same way and be unwavering in this time. So let us build homes where love can dwell. And this is a type of home, a community. This is the people's house. So everyone should feel comfortable here, and not that we're pitting one against the other. Let us proclaim from the rooftops, all are welcome here. All are welcome. All are welcome in this place, in this country, in this state. Our liberties we praise, our liberties we maintain, our rights we maintain. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Amos Jr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. For me, what is going on here is something that, once again, I've said this before, this is something that we should not be doing. You know, once again, for those of you that are new here, one of the things that I said last year is one of my mentors told me, you have to know where you've been in order to know where you're going. And I'll repeat that again. You have to know where you've been in order to know where you're going. For me, this bill is something that is close to my heart because I know from seeing statistics, the people that we are talking about is 1% of our population. People who look like me represent 4% of our population. I don't know where it's going to stop at. You know, I'm hearing they want to get rid of all civil rights. I think that is totally wrong. I don't think that is something that we should be doing. And normally I speak from the heart, but I have a prepared thing here that I want to read to everyone. Transgender people deserve the same dignity, respect, and rights as everyone else. Fairness means ensuring that all individuals, regardless of gender identity, have equal access to opportunities, health care, employment, and legal protections. No one should face discrimination. I don't care who you are. Violence and exclusion simply for being who they are. They should not have to face those things because we are all on this earth for a reason. You might not agree with it, but that is a fact. We all are here for a reason. We're not to condemn anyone. That's my teaching. We just aren't. So for me, supporting transgender rights is not about granting special treatment. It is about affirming basic human rights and fostering a society where everyone can live authentically and safely. True fairness means standing against injustice and ensuring that all people, regardless of their gender identity, are treated with respect and equality under our laws. And once again, our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Wickendall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Good afternoon, my friends. I must confess, it pains me to be here today. It pains me to see how the rights of an entire group of people can be so quickly and easily discarded. It pains me to hear the slander, the stereotypes, and the fear leveled at the trans community, my friends, and my family, my people. People who just want to live their lives, to be themselves, and to live free of fear. This is a fear that I have known. In the summer of 2006, I took my career into my own hands. That spring, I had joined KGAN as a retirement plan specialist, my first job after college, a job that took 6 months to find. At that time, it was still very much legal for employers to say no. Know that we would not support you in your transition and say no words at all and find cause to dismiss me from my job. For over a year while I worked with HR, there was not a moment that I was not hypervigilant. Worried either that I would be forcibly outed or worried that my career would suffer death by 1,000 cuts or that some other contrivance could be used to get rid of me. But something unexpected and something amazing happened along the way. Governor Chet Culver had enshrined protections for gender identity in the Iowa Civil Rights Act. It was a moment that not only inspired hope, but pride and love for this great state that we all call home. And when the time came, my employer stood with me, told me in no uncertain terms that I was a cherished member of their team, that my contributions were valued, and that discrimination, harassment, and intimidation for me being a trans woman would not be tolerated. That is why these protections are so important, because it affirms and respects our dignity and our humanity. Because I have to tell you personally that sitting in that subcommittee Monday, how much it breaks my heart to hear the most heinous and stereotypes and slander leveled at transgender people. That we are all just vile people or predators who exist to harass and intimidate women. Or that our entire lives are just a kink or a fetish, or that our lives are a giant conspiracy of the pharmaceutical industry, or that we're all just brainwashed or byproduct of failure of upbringing. None of that is true. We are human beings. We are American citizens. We are Iowans. And I will tell you personally, I transitioned to save my life. Because truth be told, if culture or upbringing determined a person's orientation or gender identity, I should be the straightest person in any room. I grew up in rural Iowa. I was raised, baptized, and confirmed in the Missouri Synod Lutheran faith. My father was my role model, a 6th-degree black belt who taught me how to play basketball and soccer, for whom even my friends were like, "You have the coolest dad ever." Like he hangs out with you and plays video games with you and stuff. My mother, whose boundless love was the rock for which our family weathered every storm, who taught me how to read, to swim, how to play the pipe organ. I spent my summers with my grandparents in Kossuth County, fishing and helping out around the farm. It was the kind of upbringing that Pure Flix movies are made of. I went to a private Lutheran school until 8th grade, the kind that taught that men were men and women were women and America is God's chosen country. And yet, I knew inside that I was a girl from the age of 9. And I remember one Sunday school lesson. It was a lesson on gift giving and what would be an inappropriate gift. And the photo insert was a picture of a boy holding up a dress. And I remember that expression of embarrassment and confusion on that boy's face. And I remember thinking, that's what it's like for me, only in reverse. Having to wear these awful boy clothes and having to suffer of having a body that did not match who I knew myself to be. Not that I didn't try to ignore it. Not that I didn't try to hide it. Not that I didn't try to play the hand that life had dealt me. But every year that passed, the more I could not ignore it. I spiraled into depression and alcoholism. One of the few pre-transition photos that I still have is a picture of me and my son on his first swim. And the outside photo, it seems very much a happy moment and a great first milestone. But behind my smile was masking a great deal of pain. And that every day I woke up, I thought about ending it all by stepping in front of a train. I transitioned to save my life. I transitioned because I wanted to keep having those deep, meaningful conversations with my mother. I transitioned because I wanted to keep playing video games with my father. I transitioned because I wanted to keep going to concerts with my sister. And I transitioned because I wanted to be a parent to my son and to see him grow up. And I want to ask the authors of this bill, have you ever had to look into your 3-year-old's eyes and explain to him why you don't have a house anymore? To have to explain to him why you're now living with strangers and what happened to his room and all his toys? Have you ever had to do that? Because I have. The same week I transitioned on the job, I received a letter from my property management company telling me I had 30 days to move. I'd always paid my rent on time. The unit next to me sat empty for 6 months. And they would not tell me the real reason they wanted me gone. No attempt to secure no lease, just 30 days, get out. Do you know the humiliation of having to lose your home? I pray that you never do. I never want that for anyone. This bill revokes protections to our jobs, our homes, and our ability to access credit. In other words, it deprives us of our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I bring this up because the purpose of this bill and the purpose of every anti-trans bill is to further erase us from public life and to stigmatize our existence. The sum total of every anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ bill is to make our existence illegal, to force us back into the closet. If we want jobs or a place to live, we have to go back, is what they are telling us, because the authors of these bills wish us every harm. If we take our own lives because our lives being made impossible, they do not care. If we end up homeless and would die on the street, they will happily step over our bodies. If we are the victims of violence, as Sam Norquist was in New York, they are happy to look the other way. As it says in the rotunda, where law ends, tyranny begins. It is far past time these anti-trans bills be placed into the dustbin of history. And before I close my remarks today, I want to address my fellow Americans who are watching from across this country, or to my fellow Iowans. I know that you are angry. I know that you are hurting. I know that since the financial crisis of 2008, your government, both federal and state, has repeatedly failed you. You have to work harder for less, and social media is programmed to feed off your anger. But the same people that write this legislation, people that staff the think tanks or ride the DC cocktail circuit, these are the same people buying up the newspapers and controlling the algorithm. And they are the same people who pump dark money into our politics because they know that when people are angry, divided, they can profit off of your anger, misery, and division. Do not let injustice be done in your name. Refuse to play this game and refuse to be divided. The leadership of this body could have spent this week focusing on you and to improve your lives. They did not. To my friends across the aisle, I know in the short time that we have worked together, we haven't really gotten a chance to know each other. But know this about me. I am an eternal optimist. I do not believe the majority of you wanted to run this bill. I believe that you ran for your offices as most elected officials do because you take pride in your community and want to see us succeed. So do not let this bill be done in your names. Vote this bill down today, because this is not the end. Those think tanks will ask you again and again and again to remove rights and freedoms from your fellow Iowans until none remain. Draw the line in the sand and say that civil rights in Iowa are enshrined and protected. And let us get back to the people's business. Let us work to make Iowa the place where people move to instead of flee from, and a place in Iowa where all of our dreams come true, a place where we live our highest values, our liberties we prize, and our rights we will maintain.
The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Introduction of bills.
Senate File 418, a bill for an act relating to sex and gender, including those related terms for purpose of statutory construction, indication of a person's sex on certain vital records, gender identity under the Iowa Civil Rights Act, and certain criteria related to gender theory.
First reading bills and have a amendment passed on file. Chair recognizes Representative Holt.
For substitution, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to substitute Senate File 418, which is identical to House File 583.
Are there objections? Hearing none, so ordered. Chair recognizes Representative Holt for closing remarks on Senate File 418.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. Does that also apply to women? There's been a lot of false hyperbole on the floor of this chamber today. Clearly, In my opinion, Democrats do not want to talk about the reality of the erasing of women as a result of gender identity based on feelings being elevated to a protected class status in the Iowa Code. It is amazing to me, in my opinion, that the party that championed women's rights for decades now turns a blind eye to the fact that they are being erased. Discrimination in any form is unacceptable, but yet apparently it is acceptable against women in this context. It's been described as a hateful bill. Why don't women matter? In terms of the definitions for male and female in the bill, they are crystal clear. Women produce ova at some point, men produce sperm, and what was said on the floor of this chamber is another example of what apparently we've known for a while, which is Democrats cannot define women. So, Representative Meyer, I did not enter into the efforts that you seem to be engaged in my opinion, to use my words out of context, but let me talk to you a little bit about rational basis that you are concerned about, which will also be interspersed throughout my closing comments. Rational basis, how about the impossible, ambiguous definition of gender identity based upon feelings, combined with the fact that the 2007 law as applied to gender identity issues has been a constant generator of unpredictable and bizarre lawsuits and disputes. No one knows what to do, and this winds up protecting no one. The Pella Pool case, the forcing of the state to pay for gender surgeries, the paralysis of our schools, confusion in our bathrooms, the Forest City bathroom case, injured female athletes, all the female athletes displaced by males that no one on the floor of this chamber has yet talked about, but I will. All the locker room problems, the inability of any jurisdiction to find a way to protect the modesty interest of young girls and boys. Some good rational basis. Every Iowan deserves to have their human rights protected and to be treated with dignity and respect, and that includes women as well. That may have been the intent in 2007, but that was clearly not the result. Current Iowa code with gender identity as protected class does not accomplish this, and it stands in the way of Iowans trying to implement common sense policies and exercise their rights. Consider the young woman, and nobody's talking about this, of course. Consider the young woman, but I will, and Republicans will in a few minutes when this vote is taken. Consider the young woman attending a Des Moines area community college, working toward a culinary arts degree. That was her dream. And during cooking classes, students get messy. So this young woman went into the women's locker room and showers to be confronted by a fully naked, middle-aged, biological male in her changing facility who identified as a female. This young student, shocked and bewildered, did not believe she was safe and believed her privacy was violated. Dismayed and shaken, she went to school officials only to be told that she, in fact, was the problem. She was told that nothing could be done for her because gender identity is a protected class in Iowa code. Her rights, my friends across the aisle, were erased. What about those rights? She was erased. What about her? Disheartened, believing her rights were ignored and disregarded, she left the college. Her rights, long recognized in this country, evaporated in the words of our code. Her immutable characteristics as a female ignored in favor of the changing feelings of a biological male. And that's my definition of toxic masculinity. She was erased as a female. Glad you're having a good time. She was erased as a female in favor of a biological male, supported by gender identity as a protected class in the Iowa Civil Rights Code. This, in fact, was specifically cited by school officials. What of her rights, my friends across the aisle? In 2021, the city of Pella received numerous complaints from parents after a biological female was allowed to walk around the Pella Aquatic Center nearly topless, exposing her breasts because she identified as a male. In response to the incident, the city of Pella specifically cited the Iowa Civil Rights Code as the reason they could not take common sense action at the request of their citizens and to defend the innocence of children at that pool. In Johnson County, a biological female adult identifying as a male has just filed a lawsuit against the Liberty High School Community School District for attempting to implement the bathroom law, for attempting to implement the bathroom law this body passed in 2023. The school district offered a reasonable accommodation in the form of a private restroom, but this individual was not satisfied, demanding to go into the restroom with males. These are just a few examples right here in Iowa of the direct impact of gender identity based on feelings in the Iowa Civil Rights Code. Iowa is not alone in passing a bathroom bill in the past few years, but we are unique in that we are the only state that has passed such legislation while also having gender identity as a protected class in code. Because of this, the lawsuit against our bathroom bill threatens common sense policies that Iowans overwhelmingly supported to ensure that bathroom and private facility use in our schools is based on biology at birth, a truth, thereby treating all Iowans with the same standard. The bathroom policy is not the only important policy we have passed that is at risk. At the urging of Iowans, we also passed legislation to protect women's sports and to prohibit sex change procedures and hormone treatments on our minor children. All of these common sense policies are at risk so long as gender identity remains in the Iowa Civil Rights Code. Identity based on feelings, not biology. A few years ago, Iowa Republicans found out that taxpayers were footing the bill for sex change operations and hormone therapies for individuals on Medicaid and in our prisons. And we passed legislation to stop it. In 2019, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called Good versus the Iowa Department of Human Services that this so-called treatment had to continue to be paid for by taxpayers, citing the fact that gender identity is a protected class in Iowa code. Twice, this body has tried to resolve this by passing laws, and in each instance, the effort has failed. Again, with one of the main reasons cited is that gender identity is a protected class in our code. At taxpayer expense, the number of Medicaid claims for gender reassignment procedures has risen from 138 claims in 2015 to 2,796 in 2022. The actual unique number of individuals who have gotten these procedures has risen from 37 in 2015 to 612 in 2022, with the total cost to taxpayers just from 2015 to 2022 amounting to $1,950,613. If efforts to stop this were struck down by the Iowa Supreme Court because of the protected class status, what about our laws passed the last few years, common sense laws, to protect women's sports and changing facilities and prohibit sex change procedures and operations on minor children, which are already actively undergoing court challenge? If efforts to stop taxpayer funding of sex reassignment procedures were struck down by the Iowa Supreme Court because of the protected class status, we can only conclude that our laws to protect women's sports, changing facilities, and bathrooms, their safety, and prohibit sex change procedures on minors would suffer the same fate. We cannot and we will not let that happen. If our laws protecting women's sports is struck down by a lawsuit because the laws conflict with gender identity being a protected class, I worry we could have a Peyton McNabb tragedy right here in Iowa. Why doesn't that matter? Peyton McNabb was a 17-year-old North Carolina high school volleyball player with dreams of being a college athlete. Her dreams were shattered in 2022 when her transgender opponent spiked the ball with such force that when it struck Peyton in the face, it knocked her unconscious. And when she woke up, she was diagnosed with permanent brain damage and has difficulty walking without falling. Peyton later stated, quote, "If only my rights had been more important than a man's feelings." Why doesn't that matter? Iowa's very own Ainsley Erzin, a high school track star from Carlisle, had this reality check in the Des Moines Register a few years ago. Quote, "My time of 2:06:52, the time that made me the fastest Iowa high school female 800 runner of all time, the time that earned me the title of national champion, was easily beat by 85 high school boys at the 2021 Iowa high school track meet alone. 85, just in our small state of Iowa," unquote. Ainsley's statement shows how easily her records, her hard work as a female could be erased as the protections for women's sports are destroyed by a new standard that was put in code in 2007 that denies biological truth and therefore denies the rights of women and erases them. This is also an important free speech issue. Recognizing gender identity as a protected class has resulted in mandates around pronoun usage and names, raising free speech concerns. So-called misgendering could trigger lawsuits and disciplinary action, compelling individuals to adopt language they do not accept. By removing gender identity from code, Iowa could reduce legal pressures and allow people to express their views without fear of penalty. The removal of gender identity as a protected class means that transgender rights are not elevated above women and other citizens. The hyperbolic argument that taking this step will cause discrimination does not hold up to scrutiny or common sense. The Federal Civil Rights Code does not include gender identity. The most transgender-friendly president in our history, Joe Biden, did not deem it necessary to add this protection. 28 other states do not have gender identity as a protected class, including 3 states with the highest population of transgender individuals: Florida, Texas, and North Carolina. Transgender individuals will be protected like all Americans by the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, federal law, the Iowa Constitution, and Iowa law. For years, we've heard about the privilege of white men, yet we are told that giving transgender Iowans the same protections that white men and all other Iowans enjoy would make them subhuman. Additionally, as a result of the U.S. Supreme Court Bostock decision and other federal laws, transgender individuals have additional federal protections. So let's get some facts straight. What will transgender individuals not be able to do if gender identity is removed from the Iowa Civil Rights Code? They will not be able to use public restrooms, dressing rooms, and showers designated for the opposite sex. They will not have access to prison cells, hotel rooms, homeless and domestic abuse shelters, and other spaces designated for the opposite sex. They will not have access to free sex change procedures and surgeries paid for by taxpayers. They will not be able to file legal complaints against a business that believes sex is binary and implements common sense policies and accommodations accordingly. The erasing of women and the disregard for truth in the name of gender identity is profound. Maternity care is now perinatal care, Mother is now birthing person or inseminated person. Breastfeeding has become chest feeding. Women are having scholarships, gold medals, and records taken away from them. Why doesn't that matter? Why would anyone, particularly those whose legacy was fierce advocacy for the rights of women, be okay with this? The legislature of Iowa, for the future of our children and our culture, has a vested interest and solemn responsibility to stand up for immutable truth. This is why we use scientific facts, not feelings ever changing, as the basis of the definitions in this bill. The legislature of Iowa created the Civil Rights Code, and we believe it is absolutely within our authority to change it. Obvious in our authority to add classes to the Civil Rights Code is our authority to alter that same code and remove what had previously been put there by prior legislatures, just has been done since the beginning of our great state. In spite of loud proclamations otherwise, transgender Iowans will have the same rights and protections as everyone else, as they should. But the removal of gender identity as a protected class will prevent the infringement on the rights of others, particularly women who stand to be erased, along with decades of gains toward equality, by a protected status that is not based on an immutable trait, but rather a changing identity predicated upon feelings. There is no way to extend the ability of transgender individuals to play in the sport of their choice and use the facilities of their choice without profoundly infringing on the rights, safety, and long-protected opportunities of others. This is the slippery slope of a protected status based on feelings as opposed to unchangeable fact. For this reason, the only path forward is to stand on immutable truth as the basis for the greatest possible protection for the rights of all individuals. Mr. Speaker, I move Senate File 418.
Representative Holt moves the bill be read for the last time and placed on its passage. Are there objections? Hearing none, the clerk will read.
Senate File 418, a bill for an act related to sex and gender, including those related to terms for the purpose of statutory construction, indication of a person's sex on certain vital records, gender identity under the Iowa Civil Rights Act, and school criteria under the gender theory, be it enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Iowa.
Question now, shall the bill pass? All those in favor of passage vote aye. Those opposed vote no. The clerk will open the machine and see your vote. Mattson votes no. Johnson of Polk votes no. Amos Jr. votes no. Cisneros votes aye. Wicknendall votes no. Levin votes no. Zabner votes no. Have you all now voted? Clerk, close machine. House may tentative results of the vote. Those voting aye, 60. Those voting no, 35. Absent, not voting 5. Bill received a constitutional majority declared to pass the House. Their objection is the title. Chair hears none. The title is agreed to. Chair recognizes Representative Winchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. At this time, please immediately message Senate File 418 to the Senate.
Their objections, hearing none, so ordered. Chair recognizes Representative Winchell.